Welcome back, everybody. This is ISA Insider News. My name is Max Tim, and we are with, as always,
Shayna Weber. I love how he intros me. Thank you, Max. You're like, and
presenting
to you. And then I'm
happening?
like, la.
We should start.
What is happening?
Like somebody should be.
I know. I know. Come on, Scott, come in and just be like, like the Jeffersons, when people come in the house, they're like, and now presenting so-and-so who's I want to do a party like that.
Announcing guests as they enter is the height of decorum. The more volume displayed, the more honor is bestowed upon everyone present.
Stanley Hudson and his mistress, Cynthia.
Now, no major personal news other than the fact that we just went through 3 days of the most humid weather I can remember having for a long time here in the Midwest, but it's finally cool, still rainy and kind of crappy. Not that I'm meaning to start off our week with reference to the weather, but.
Well, it's been hot here and we have an ant infestation in our house near the cat food. So that's fun.
That kind of, in a long jump of a way, connects to what we're going to be watching before our next recording, Prey.
Yes.
That was a lot.
Stay tuned for next week. We're gonna watch Prey and talk about it.
Yeah, talk about.
So we didn't get to it.
Preying on ants.
No, they're preying on us.
That's true either way. But we have to turn into the prey.
They're like little They're like little predators.
That's what I meant. Never mind, everybody.
Rewind.
Right.
Anyway, all right. So
let's get into the top headline of the week.
Okay, our top headline this week is bigger, better, fewer. That seems to be what all these streamers right now are saying in terms of their films. So we pulled this article from June 2022 talking about Netflix, and then we're also talking about HBO Max and what is going on currently with Batgirl and their restructuring or whatever they're doing over there.
Warner Brothers Discovery is doing a whole bunch of stuff with HBO Max. That's been the huge news of the past week, really. But I like highlighting this article because it gives more specifics in terms of what Netflix is doing in relation to the industry in June. And then we can compare this whole Warner Brothers Discovery situation about how, if you haven't heard, Warner Brothers Discovery slashed, I believe it's 70% of the HBO scripted development staff. Which is crazy. And a big part of it at a really basic level is that they have scripted staff on HBO, scripted staff on HBO Max. I still don't necessarily know what the hell the difference is. But from a money standpoint, there are two staffs. And so I think what they're really doing is just condensing. Why not just have them all in one place? It makes a little bit of sense. But the sad news is that HBO Max is going to be steering away from scripted content a lot, which sucks a lot. And it also kind of Discovery is coming in and going to be creating more reality shows. But in comparison to what Netflix has been doing over the past few months, it's all the same thing. So this world is just, huge shifts going on here, people.
Yeah, it seems to be that both of them, and also Apple TV did it when they first started, was do these really epically big budget movies that have big names in them, and then use those to catapult a series of not of the same, but to then create a series with maybe those stars or big name stars. It just seems like they're all breaking away from independent, lower budget projects, which is quite sad to me.
It is. It's sad. As the article is saying, these business moves were undoubtedly a far cry from a few years ago at Netflix, when movies with budgets over 100 million to 150 million were rare. This is in comparison to how they've been releasing a lot of movies over the past couple of years, like Don't Look Up, Red Notice, Adam Project, and then of course recently The Gray Man. Like the article says, the streamer was cited as the savior of mid-budget movies and once theatrical staples of romantic comedies like To All the Boys I've Loved Before, The Kissing Booth, Always Be My Maybe. And they're not necessarily saying they're not going to be making those movies ever again. I think they'd be dumb not to. But basically what they're trying to do is, instead of make two movies at 10 million a piece, they're going to make one at 20 million, just as an example. So we'll see what this does in the coming years. This is primarily from a movie stance, a movie mandate. So we don't know if it's going to be affecting the TV development slate, but we just got to be aware of these things. This is why the ISA Insider is helpful. You just got to be digging into the news,
Yeah, it's a bummer, if you ask me.
It is a bummer. It's a real bummer because HBO is famous for developing some of the greatest TV shows ever, and now suddenly they're slashing almost, more than half of their TV development slate. I don't know what it means. I don't know what it's going to look like a year from now. And like you were saying before we started, as far as Netflix is concerned, if the Sandman hadn't come out, just recently, you were seriously considering just not subscribing to Netflix anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I go on Netflix and there's like one thing that I find that I want to watch that I'm like, okay, I'll watch that. And then when I'm over it, I'm like, okay, now I have to feel like I have to search, where I felt like a few years ago, or even up to last year, there was just like tons of different kinds of shows. And that also included reality shows, which I think are fun, like the home renovation shows and
Yeah.
like the Marie Kondo things, and like there's the Dame Fresh Fried and Crispy, which is about food. Like I like the variety, and I feel like the variety is getting smaller and smaller. And so I understand why people are leaving Netflix and their subscriber numbers are going down, because it's just not the same quality and quantity. I don't think you have to give up quantity necessarily for quality. Like you said, cutting one 10 million movie, two $10 million movies to make a 20 million. I think it's more like cutting three $10 million movies to make a $30 million movie with like Ryan Reynolds in it. It's like, I get it, but there's room for both, I feel like. And that, it makes me sad.
I think it's all sadly a reaction to capitalism.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, we could just end our incredibly depressing news broadcast on that note.
Well, I'm sure that
really
some streamer will come out of the woodwork and do what Netflix did at the beginning, where you do independent films and just, start bringing those in. And I think that'd be cool. So anybody who wants to do that, I'll subscribe.
The hard part about the smaller films, like, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, you can't necessarily gain subscribers on a movie like that because people aren't necessarily eagerly awaiting this movie. Once it does well and people then hear about it, then people will subscribe to watch the movie. But it's a gamble. Like, does that, I don't know if it's going to do well. I think it might do well. So I can kind of understand.
Well, for that one, they kind of had the idea. They knew, because they did Kissing Booth. It was like they had this group of YA movies, and they took a gamble and it paid off. And then they went, oh, yeah. But I feel, yeah. So, I mean, you got to take chances, and they don't want to, I guess, right now. So
I think it's a perfect example of where the movie industry was, 10 years ago, which even just theatrically, they're like, well, we're just going to focus, and it's more than 10 years. We're going to focus on big budget tentpoles only, because that's what's going to draw people to the theaters.
Yeah.
And now the streamers are being forced to do that again, because the economy is a little low. Things are, a little iffy, but we'll see what happens in a year from now and what kind of content's coming out. I don't think the TV industry is going to be hurt by any means, but we are going to be seeing a lot more of these event style TV shows. I think I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. All right, let's move on to This Week in ISA Insider. So we have one article that we are highlighting. And what is that article? We
pulled this article written by Sonia Alexander, and it is titled Art and Independence, an interview with the Sandman television writer Vanessa Benton. So we will talk in a few minutes about the Sandman. We've watched some of that, but this is a really great article about Vanessa Benton, who is a writer on the Sandman. And it's sort of like laying out a little bit her trajectory in the business. And the reason why I really like this article, not only because it references the Sandman, which I love, but it talks about how she was basically a showrunner's assistant on a BET show, and she knew and had met the showrunner Alan Heinberg from Sandman. And that's really like the way that she got on the Sandman was because of Alan. Alan went like, oh, let me think about writers that I know that would be good for this, who may fit and match what we're trying to do here. And if you read this article and you scroll down, you'll see Vanessa's picture, and you'll understand. You'll get it. You'll be like, okay, I understand that connection. But I just think it's really great because, that's what the business is. That's networking 101. that's what you want. You got to do the work, and you have to be a good writer, and you have to be good at your job, whatever it is, if it's a showrunner's assistant or whatever. But it's all about those connections you make and it's like the long relationships that you have.
It's the long game. You got to be playing the long game for sure. And I get it. A lot of writers who are watching this may be like, well, I'm not just out of college, and so I'm not able to start at just some assistant position. I need to get material into people's hands so I can get staff somewhere. It works the same way. It's just not the exact same route. You still have to be making connections via Twitter, online networking events, or submitting to contests, or anything and everything you can possibly do. Write a blog that maybe gets people, people's interest, something. I think my favorite part of the article, and there are a lot of great elements to this article, but it's cited here that Octavia Butler is considered the first African-American science fiction writer. And the article says in her book, A Blood Child and Other Stories, she has a quote that's relevant to all industries and disciplines. And I think every writer needs to hear this. I need to be reminded of this as often as possible. And Octavia says in this book, first, forget inspiration. Habit is more dependable. Habit will sustain you whether you're inspired or not. Habit will help you polish your stories. Inspiration won't. Habit is persistence and practice. And I think the best piece of advice you can give a writer, because we rely on inspiration far too often, whether it's a first draft vomit version or it's the rewrite process. We can't rely on the inspiration. And I'm really speaking from personal experience here. I too often just rely on, I'm not inspired to, write right now. So I'm just I'm not into it. The more often, and I'm a perfect example, the more often you fall into that mode of, I'm just not creatively inspired right now, then that's the habit.
Yeah.
As opposed to the habit of just going, nope, I don't care if I'm inspired or not. I got to figure something out. And suddenly it becomes a regular, even if it's just 20 minutes a day of sitting down and trying to figure something out in, freehand writing or whatever, you get into that habit. So I think this is why these articles are so worthwhile, and we should all be reading them.
Yeah, it's a really great article. She goes into what the writer's room looks like, how she formulates an idea and starts writing. She talks about her routine. I mean, it's a really great article, and you should check it out on ISA Insider.
You should. All right, so moving on to what are we watching? We already mentioned some of it.
So obviously I watched The Sandman. That's what I did this weekend, people. I wasn't feeling well, so I actually got some time to watch shows, and I watched about 7 episodes so far of Sandman. If you know me at all, which most of you do not, I am a huge Neil Gaiman fan. I have been for a very long time. The first Neil Gaiman book I read, I read Neverwhere and Coraline, and I love them both. And I'm just a huge fan. And so I was very, very excited for Netflix to do Sandman, and I was not disappointed. I think it is epically fun, and when I started watching it, I wanted it to be a little bit darker, a little more goth feeling, because it felt like it was leaning more towards like Harry Potter-ish. Yeah. But if you're feeling that way too and you haven't gotten very far, it does get darker, and there is some darkness in there, but it's also just beautifully done and well written and just freaking gorgeous. What a great fantasy adventure.
Totally. I've known of the Sandman. I've been a fan of Neil Gaiman's for a long time, not as big as you, but I've read quite a few of his books. The Graveyard Book, I think, is my favorite of his. But I have the graphic novel for the Sandman. I've never read it. Just looked at the pretty pictures. So I knew basics in terms of the show. And so coming into the pilot, I was pretty much fresh. I was as if I was someone who really didn't know anything about it. But I knew the visuals were going to be amazing. I knew it was very high fantasy, and the pilot was amazing. I think it's a perfect example for anyone who, and I hesitate to say this because I don't want to give the go ahead for anybody who has a huge high fantasy idea to then, right. You're going uphill trying to do that. Believe me, take my word for it. But, nonetheless, if you have a huge idea, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or something with a ton of backstory, this pilot is a perfect example of how to do it, because it was not expositional. And at the same time, it was almost entirely exposition. And it felt engaging, and you cared about these characters. And I mean, there was one point where you're focused on one person who's at a particular age, and suddenly you jump and this person is literally on their deathbed. And I'm like, oh, we're there now. And so just following all of that was a lot of fun. And I could tell that they were holding back on a ton of visuals because they did not go into visual spectacle nearly as much. So it's the only episode I've watched yet, and it was engaging. I'm looking forward to diving back in for sure.
Yeah, I think that they did a really, really great job of casting. And I know that there's, tons of fans who are like, no, it has to be like this, it has to be like this. But I really have to say, like, every person who comes on there, some are completely brand new to me and some are familiar. And it's just nice because I get lost. I'm not thinking about who they were in something else. I'm like, oh, they're this person now.
Yeah.
And Tom Sturridge, who plays the lead, Dream or Morpheus, whatever you want to call that person, is amazing. I mean, absolutely perfect in my brain. And wow, I'm excited for his career moving forward because I think he's
every time the guy was on screen, I was like, where'd they find this dude?
I know.
I just couldn't believe how perfectly cast he was, even just from a physical standpoint. Like, I don't even know how his hair, but his body just looked unhuman like. And you could tell it wasn't CG oriented. He was nude for basically the entire episode, and it was just something like it was perfect. Basically, is how I was thinking about it. So the Sandman, and then that was basically everything you watched, right? Because you watched 7 episodes. Oh no, you rewatched Jurassic Park.
My kid goes to summer camp, and every week is like a theme, and this week is Jurassic Park week, and he was scared because kids were talking about Jurassic Park, like the dinosaurs and stuff. So he was a little bit scared of watching the movie because I think he had a bigger idea in his brain, of like, oh no, T-Rex, whatever. So we watched the original Jurassic Park, which was so fun. And then we started to watch Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World. And it just was like, I don't think I ever saw the second one. I was like, I didn't miss anything because it's pretty. Ooh.
Well, so he wasn't scared.
He was a little bit scared, but I gave him fair warning when like the T-Rex is coming, in the rainstorm, and then you see the little cup of water go like ding, ding. Like, I gave him warning that it was coming. And then when he saw it, he was fine. Yeah. Because he understands that movies are fake and everything's pretend or whatever. But yeah, it was the anticipation more than anything else. Okay. So.
Yeah, God, what a throwback, man.
I know, but good one.
I watched The Sandman, like I said, and then I binged the show Night Sky with J.K. Simmons and Sissy Spacek. They both do an incredible job. If you like a really slow burn with a very big world that they reveal very little of, you'll like it. I've never seen a show where I've watched all 8 episodes of a season and I had like almost no answers to all the questions that they raised, which was really, it's a little disappointing, but still engaging. I don't know. I'm very curious to see if you want to watch it. Definitely, check it out because it is fantasy sci-fi, but at a very low level fantasy sci-fi. It's like all the fantasy sci-fi is just kind of on the edge. It's like, okay, what's happening? And then in the final episode, you're like, oh, this is science fiction. So it's cool. I'm glad I watched it.
It sounds a little bit like Take Shelter.
I don't know. Take Shelter.
Oh my gosh. It's Michael Shannon. Go watch that.
Okay.
Go watch Take Shelter. It kind of has the same like idea, but very, very cool movie. Are they trying to do a second season, or was it straight up like limited?
There has to be a second season. The way they did it was like,
right.
Total clip. I mean, not necessarily cliffhanger. Like cliffhanger is like, oh no, I can't believe you just ended the episode there. This was like, oh wow, look at the new piece of information we have. But it's great to be studying these shows. I'm becoming less commitment phobic when choosing shows. It's hard for me sometimes, man. I'm just gonna watch Frasier.
Oh my God. I'll just be over here watching Frasier.
Yeah, God, Frasier's good. Twitter question time. So what is the Twitter question that we have this week?
Okay, so we found a great Twitter question posted by Rebecca Louise Miller. She's at Rebecca Lou NYC. Screenwriters, what do you do when you're scared your rewrites might turn your script into a smoldering dumpster fire? And I just thought that was hilarious. And poignant.
I'm laughing just because of what my immediate answer in my head was when I read the question, and it was deal with it. Manage your fear. Like, I don't, there's a whole other level of education that Shayna and I are going to go into a little bit as far as how to prepare for your rewrites. But in terms of managing your fear, tough luck, everybody. It's going to be there for the rest of your life. Like, there's a dual side approach to answering this question.
So if you ever ask Max what to do if you're scared, he'll just be like, deal with it.
Well,
Good times.
it's the blunt honesty, man. If you're going to be doing this the rest of your life, and you're not in this for one hit wonder,
True. Just deal with it, people. There's your answer. But anyway,
Yeah.
to get into more specifics about how to maybe handle your rewrite and be prepared for your rewrite, I think for me, when I'm rewriting, is I have to have a plan, and I have to understand that I need to look at it in chunks. So if it's a film, I'm not talking about a TV series, I don't know. But for a film, like, I try to write down my main notes that I have. And I guess it also depends on where you're getting your notes from. If it's just your own rewrite with your own thoughts, or if you've gotten notes from somebody that you trust and know, is good for notes.
Yeah.
And you're sort of taking those notes and putting them in. But basically for me, what I do in the simplest terms is just sort of take it in chunks and make sure that I have my script, my version that I just ended with, and I create a new one. And then I have free reign to sort of like rip it apart, take things out, move things down to the bottom if you don't want to totally get rid of them, and just sort of build each act. So do your first act, then read the whole thing with those changes, and then sort of implement into the next two acts. That's what I do. But what do you say?
Totally.
Max?
First, like, really practical pieces of advice. Two of them come off the top of my head. Save multiple files of your script. Don't throw anything away. Just keep multiple files, title them as such, and don't make the rewrites in the pages right away. You got to go back to what feels like the drawing board, the outlining process, list making. It'll help you, just because it's what you get too mired in the muck of detail when you're in the pages. Is this the right word? Is the scene heading correct? That's editing,
That's true.
So because you can't see the forest for the trees, so you got to bounce back out and go, okay, wait a minute. Then it's a lot what you're saying, Shayna, is you compile the notes that you've received. I highly suggest that you get at least 3 sets of notes from 3 separate people, because you're going to be able to see patterns. A good example was a writer that I was working with today through my Story Farm consulting. She's received a decent set of notes on this one pilot. So we'll kind of take the TV approach here, because the thing to remember about TV is that you're not going to be writing the future episodes. You're just focusing on the pilot and then the pitch deck. The pitch deck is relatively simple to rewrite, but you do want to know where this show is going. Otherwise, what is your pilot going to be? So a lot of her notes were focused on, or at least what she received, was character development in general. But then what does it mean? Like, you kind of have to title it. Here's character development. Fine. Who are the characters that I need to develop? What about them do I need to develop? What about the relationships, are working, or what about them are not working? But then also connecting to, and this is specific to her project, it was a little too plot forward, and we weren't having or presenting enough character motivated personal storyline scenes where plot wasn't involved at all. So that means, and I'm going a little long-winded here, but there was one scene near the end of her pilot where there was a big fight between 2 characters, and it was kind of like these 2 characters were breaking apart, and they had, an established relationship they no longer will after this fight. But I didn't feel connected to that fight because I didn't have a level of personal storyline scenes between the 2, or even individually, well prior to that scene in the end. So that's the hard part about rewriting, is that you have to be able to decipher the notes. Like, what do the notes mean?
Yeah.
Because there's one thing for a writer or for a reader to say, well, we need more character driven stuff, or it's not quite, well, that doesn't really help. Let's get into the specifics, Then it's just organizing, like you're saying. Do I put it in the first act? What do I do in the second act? And let's make some changes. What when I see way too often, and I'm sure you see it too, Shayna, is that writers get these notes and then they just add the scenes.
Right.
They just make the script longer, and it's it doesn't work that way. You gotta get rid of stuff, man. You gotta
You
kill
have
the
to cut.
darlings.
I also remember that the thing that works for me is printing out the script
Hmm.
and writing on it, like read through it, thinking about those notes and cross things out on the paper and write notes to yourself on the paper as they come up in your brain. And that for me is really helpful when I go to my computer screen, because yeah, as you said, Max, you can get lost in the little details of like a word and things like that. And sometimes on the screen, it's really easy to sort of get stuck in one scene or area or page or whatever. So it's sometimes good to print the whole thing out and sort of just like go to town on that written copy and then bring that forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like page work rewriting, lines of dialogue, scene direction. Do I get rid of a scene entirely? But then it's all just organizing, concept changes, character changes, structure changes, page work. Like I have to keep it organized almost in this OCD level. And then it's objectives. It's like I'm moving forward with this change. It's going to affect everything else, but you just have to focus on the one. Otherwise, it's just overwhelming. So in terms of what Rebecca's asking, what do you do when you're scared your rewrites might turn your script into a smoldering dumpster fire? They might. But you have to try. What are you going to do? You can't, if you're seeing that it's going in the direction that you don't want it to go in, then of course don't make the changes, but there are going to have to be some changes made if you've got all these sets of notes that are telling you one thing.
And sometimes sometimes burning, turning your script into a dumpster fire and burning some things, burning some stuff in there, sometimes frees you of this thing you're holding on to that maybe isn't working, but you love it. Like, yeah, kill your darlings, burn your bridges, sort of like get down to it. As a segue to that, a good way also is to hear your words out loud in a table read, which is an event we have coming up on Friday, August 12th. It's our Table Read My Screenplay live event. We are doing a reading of Elizabeth Klein Has No Friends. It is a comedy feature. If you see this by then, tune in. If not, we will be replaying it probably on our YouTube page and our pro tips page. But yeah, as somebody who needs to sort of figure out what's working, a great way is to hear your dialogue and your prose out loud so you can hear the rhythm and figure out like, oh, well, that wasn't working, or that's too much dialogue or too much exposition. And a table read is a really great way to do that.
The table read events that the ISA puts on, they're awesome. We could probably go for another 20 minutes talking about rewriting, maybe even more. But let's move into the final segment. This is kind of good/weird news if you're slightly demented. So we'll call it weird news of the week. The headline says Disney World guests trapped on It's a Small World ride for over an hour.
And it may not seem like that long, but I can imagine being stuck on that for an hour would feel like an entire day.
Oh, yeah. And what the article is talking about is how the ride itself, in terms of the attractions, didn't stop. The song continued, the little dancing people continued, and all these poor guests are just sitting there in the little raft floating in the water.
It's a small world after all.
Constantly hearing.
It's a small world after all.
And they interviewed
Oh
some
my
people,
gosh.
and they were just like, everyone was on a boat. So we sat there for about an hour, stuck with the song on repeat. The guest wrote, reiterating that the experience was torture. I think the best part of the article is that it cites, and it gives you a video link to a 1993 Simpsons episode where Bart and Lisa have their own adventure on a fictionalized version of the ride, which happens in the Duff Brewing Factory. Lisa drinks the water and she has an acid trip. So I don't know. It's everybody's safe and fine and nothing horrible happens. So this is why it's like, hey, you're still at Disney World. Let's just put things in perspective here.
That's true. It does say in the article, though, that last month Disney World saw a number of other incidences in the park.
It's been a mess. Fist fights and oh God, they've been trying to implement all this new technology. Like we've had some family friends talking about how they've gone, and if you're like over the age of 20, You have no idea even how to use any of the technology, like the fast pass stuff. You have to do it all on your phone. And it's been crazy because so many people are flocking to the Disney theme parks. Like Disney in their quarterly earnings report basically said, I think we might even stated this last time, that they're relying on their theme parks to be kind of propping up the rest of their company right now. It's crazy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So be
Wow.
careful when you go on It's a Small World, and just pray that you don't get stuck.
Yeah, just pray you make it through without pausing.
Just like we have to pray to make it through our rewrites.
Exactly.
I think that's it. We're going to end on a weird note again.
We like it. Yeah, we're going to change good news of the week to weird news of the week.
Right. All right, everybody. As always, Shayna, it's fun. And I'll see you next week.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.